Welcome to debate. Imagine for a moment that you're driving a car down a really busy, unpredictable highway, but instead of looking through the windshield, your entire dashboard is just totally covered up.
Right, and your only source of information is like a blurry photograph taken maybe 6 months ago, showing you swerving slightly out of your lane.
Exactly. And then when you finally reach your destination, someone just hands you a scorecard grading your entire year of driving based almost exclusively on that one single photograph. I mean, in the context of modern work, that is precisely what the traditional annual performance review actually is.
Yeah, it's retrospective, it is structurally blind, and it's fundamentally broken.
It really is. So today we are examining a profound shift away from that system. We're diving into Jonathan H. Westover's comprehensive analysis of the Integrated Personnel Evaluation Model, or IPM, which is a framework developed by Illich in 2026.
And this framework attempts this massive transformation of how we evaluate personnel in the digital economy, right?
Right. We are asking one central question today. Can organizations successfully integrate continuous AI-driven performance data with empathy-led leadership to create a fair, developmental evaluation system? Or is continuous algorithmic monitoring just, fundamentally incompatible with the psychological safety required to actually do good work?
Yeah, it's a huge question.
I will argue that the IPEM framework's integration of multidimensional metrics, AI analytics, and structured empathy accountability provides an objective, developmental, and equitable solution to the systemic failures of traditional appraisals.
And I will argue that continuous digital tracking and predictive AI, even when it is wrapped in a corporate mandate of empathy, inherently functions as a surveillance architecture. And it is an architecture that fundamentally erodes the psychological safety and the authentic development it claims to foster.
So let's start by looking at exactly why Illich's framework was developed in the first place. I mean, to understand why this IPEM model is so revolutionary, we have to admit that the way we've been measuring human performance is fundamentally broken at its core.
Oh, absolutely. Annual reviews, forced distribution rankings, single-source supervisor ratings, these were built for an industrial era.
Right, they were designed for stable, highly repetitive job functions where you could literally count the widgets coming off an assembly line.
But if you're a manager listening to this, think about your last one-on-one with a knowledge worker. I mean, how do you objectively measure creative problem solving or strategic foresight once a year?
You really can't, not with a backward-looking annual scorecard.
No, you can't. On the failure of the legacy system, we are in complete agreement.
Yeah, and when organizational psychologists actually crunch the numbers on traditional performance scores, like Skellin et al.'s research, which is cited in the material, they find a pretty devastating reality. When you break down the variance in those scores, things like rater-specific effects and sheer measurement error explain more of the final grade than the employee's actual job performance.
Just let that sink in.
Right? Your performance score is often more a reflection of your manager's cognitive biases. Things like recency bias, where they only remember what you did last week, or similarity bias, where they unconsciously favor you because you share the same background, than your actual contribution to the company. The IPEM framework solves this structural flaw.
Well, it attempts to solve it, certainly, but how exactly?
By leveraging the digital infrastructure we already have to capture multidimensional data. We aren't just looking at outputs anymore, like, a final sales number. The system looks at inputs and processes in real time.
Real time?
Yes. And by deploying AI analytics to process this continuous flow of work data, we remove that retrospective rater bias. We provide real-time, objective data to managers, shifting the entire paradigm from an episodic, judgmental event into continuous, data-informed developmental coaching.
Look, as I said, I agree that legacy appraisal systems are deeply flawed, subjective, and practically obsolete from modern knowledge work. But we have to be incredibly careful about the medicine we prescribe for this disease. Continuous performance management, as operationalized through AI and digital tracking, is a cure with severe, potentially toxic side effects.
Toxic in what way? I mean, transparency is generally considered a positive shift.
The core issue lies in human psychology. When you look at the behavioral data, and I'm thinking of Murphy and Cleveland's research here, a fundamental truth emerges. When evaluation is continuous, employees begin to view every single interaction through an evaluative lens.
Okay,
This activates a state of chronic impression management. You are no longer just doing your work. You are performing the act of working for the machine. Deploying AI for predictive analytics, like calculating an employee's flight risk or using natural language processing to analyze their daily communications, it institutionalizes a state of continuous surveillance.
I think you're using the word surveillance, which implies a malicious or purely control-oriented intent. And I think that's a pretty big mischaracterization of how the technology operates in this specific framework.
It doesn't have to be malicious to be destructive. If you look at Edmondson's foundational literature on psychological safety, she defines it as the shared belief that interpersonal risk-taking is safe within a team.
Right.
You cannot take genuine interpersonal risks. You cannot admit mistakes. You cannot experiment and fail if you exist inside a digital panopticon, where every keystroke, every Slack message, and every calendar invite is continuously aggregated to calculate your value to the company.
Let's unpack how that AI actually functions, though, because it's not just some blind tracker. It functions as an objective auditor of human flaws. The source material provides a brilliant example of a global consulting firm that utilized natural language processing, or NLP, to analyze the narrative text of past performance reviews.
And what did they find?
They exposed a massive systemic, unconscious gender bias. Let me explain how the AI actually did this because it's vital. The AI isn't reading the reviews and forming subjective opinions, right? It maps semantic clusters.
Okay.
It scans thousands of documents and cross-references the types of adjectives used against the final performance scores. The algorithm revealed that women were consistently receiving feedback focused on their communication style and team dynamics, words like collaborative or abrasive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Meanwhile, men at the exact same performance rating levels, with the exact same output metrics, were receiving feedback on strategic thinking and leadership potential, words like visionary or decisive.
That is a well-known phenomenon. Yes.
But human HR business partners could never have synthesized thousands of narrative reviews manually to spot that macro pattern with that level of statistical precision.
Sure.
The AI didn't replace human judgment in that scenario. It objectively audited it. It made the invisible visible and allowed the firm to correct a systemic inequity. So it removed bias, it didn't create it.
I come at it from a different way. That single example of NLP catching human bias is a convenient success story, but it ignores the broader reality of algorithmic implementation. Look at Raghavan et al.'s research. Data scientists have consistently demonstrated that algorithmic systems frequently fail to reduce bias, precisely because they are trained on flawed, historical organizational data. But if the AI is designed to look for discrepancies, why would historical data corrupt it? Because algorithms are prediction engines, and they predict based on what they have been fed. If an organization has a 10-year history of rewarding toxic productivity, or if it historically promotes a highly homogeneous, aggressive leadership style, the AI learns that those specific behavioral traits equal high performance. Well, it doesn't know what good leadership is. It only knows what was previously rewarded. Furthermore, even if you implement rigorous demographic parity testing to catch that bias, the very act of using an AI to run sentiment analysis on an employee's self-evaluations creates an incredibly opaque environment.
Opaque? I mean, the whole point of the system is visibility.
Visibility for the manager, sure, but it is the definition of a black box for the employee. Imagine an employee writing their quarterly self-reflection. Under this system, they aren't thinking, how can I honestly assess my weaknesses so my manager can help me grow?
Why wouldn't they?
Because they are thinking, which keywords will the NLP algorithm flag as lacking leadership potential? It transforms authentic self-reflection into a game of search engine optimization for your own career. You are optimizing your words to appease a semantic mapping tool.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you're assuming the AI operates in isolation, making these unilateral automated decisions in the dark. The IPEM framework explicitly demands a human governance layer. Think of the AI in this system not as an autonomous judge, but like an MRI machine in medicine.
An MRI machine?
Yes. Before the MRI, doctors had to rely on surface-level symptoms, subjective patient reports, and guesswork. That is very much like a traditional manager relying on gut feeling or what they happen to remember from last Tuesday. The MRI scans the patient and highlights anomalies that the naked human eye simply cannot see.
Okay, I follow the mechanism.
So in the workplace, it might spot a hidden bias in review text, or it might flag that a high-performing employee's learning engagement metrics have dropped, indicating a severe flight risk 6 months before they actually resign. But here is the critical part. The MRI machine doesn't prescribe the treatment. The empathetic leader is the doctor. The algorithm simply alerts the manager, essentially saying, this employee's network centrality has dropped, they are increasingly isolated, they are at risk. The manager then initiates a supportive, human, career conversation.
I see.
And because of the governance layer, which mandates explainability requirements, meaning the system has to show why it flagged the employee, the AI is never an unquestionable black box.
The MRI analogy is rhetorically powerful, I'll give you that. But I think it fundamentally misrepresents the psychological reality of the workplace. When you go into an MRI machine, you know you are being scanned for 20 minutes to find a specific, localized problem. You do not live your entire life inside the MRI tube.
Okay, then let's evolve the analogy. It's not an MRI tube you visit once. It's a continuous health monitor, like wearing an Apple Watch that is constantly tracking your heart rhythm in the background.
Right, looking for anomalies.
Exactly. It's looking for atrial fibrillation. You aren't stressing about it every second of the day, but it's running quietly, analyzing the continuous data flow to catch a fatal anomaly before it actually kills you. In the workplace, that translates to real-time performance dashboards, and those dashboards democratize the data and remove the crippling ambiguity of performance.
And that brings us right to the reality of what it feels like to work under those dashboards. Shrinking the timeline from an annual review to a real-time dashboard fundamentally changes the psychological contract of work.
It changes it for the better. Let's look at how it actually operates in practice. The material cites a multinational tech corporation that implemented these real-time dashboards. They tracked metrics like sprint completion rates, code quality, and peer review engagement.
And what was the result?
Because this data was visible in real time, it fundamentally shifted how managers interacted with their teams. Tamboe et al. Point out that when you have real-time visibility, management shifts from retrospective blame to proactive support.
Can you give me an example of how that practically plays out?
Absolutely. Imagine you're a software engineer. Under the old system, if you struggled with a new coding language in February, you might not hear about it until you review in December, long after the project suffered.
Sure.
With a real-time dashboard, if a manager sees your code velocity dropping in week 2 of a 6-week sprint, they don't wait for a year-end review to punish you. They intervene immediately. They sit down and say, I see the velocity dipping here. What obstacles are you facing? Do we need to pull in an architect to help you? It turns the manager from a distant evaluator into an active coach.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The mechanism you just described sounds incredibly logical on paper, but it ignores the lived experience of the worker. Tracking code velocity and peer review engagement minute by minute turns every single collegial interaction into a measurable key performance indicator.
Does it, though?
Yes. How exactly is peer review engagement measured? It tracks how quickly you respond to your teammates' pull requests or how many lines of their code you comment on.
Which incentivizes teamwork, does it not?
It incentivizes transaction. You aren't helping a colleague because you're a good teammate who wants to solve a problem. You're helping them because your dashboard needs your engagement metric to stay in the green.
That's a pretty cynical view.
It's realistic. Look at Dewey and Cooper's work. Modern knowledge work is not assembly line work. It requires deep cognitive flexibility, creative problem solving, and the ability to sit with complex, unstructured problems for long periods without necessarily producing immediate, measurable output. You absolutely cannot maintain that necessary cognitive flexibility under the chronic stress of continuous monitoring.
Why does visibility equate to chronic stress, though? I would argue that transparency should alleviate the anxiety of not knowing where you stand. If you can see the dashboard, you always know you're standing.
Because the awareness of measurement alters the behavior being measured. Let me offer a different analogy. Imagine you are sitting for a highly complex, high-stakes calculus exam. Now imagine that while you are taking it, you are forced to wear a heart rate monitor.
Okay.
You know that if your heart rate spikes above a certain threshold, the proctor will receive an alert and walk over to your desk to proactively coach you on your test-taking anxiety.
Well, that sounds incredibly distracting.
Exactly. The mere awareness of the monitor alters your baseline. It induces the very anxiety it is supposedly measuring. And this brings us back to the IPM framework's reliance on self-reflection. The model recommends that employees engage in quarterly OKR check-ins.
Objectives and key results, yeah.
Right. Your OKRs are supposed to be an honest reflection of your goals and your capability gaps. But how can an employee honestly engage in that?
They engage honestly because the framework is designed to be developmental, not punitive.
But the employee knows that their digital exhaust, the metadata of their workday, their timestamps, their Slack activity, their sprint completions, is already feeding a predictive machine learning model that assesses their overall value to the company. If the machine already has a continuous aggregated score of my worth, asking me to self-reflect is a farce. It is coerced vulnerability.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how the framework actively prevents that kind of coercion. It does this by formally institutionalizing empathy and well-being, structurally intertwining them with the analytics.
Institutionalizing empathy sounds like an oxymoron. How does that actually work?
Under the traditional annual review system, employee well-being was entirely ignored because it was viewed as a nice-to-have. The IPEM framework recognizes what Deneve's evidence shows, which is that workplace well-being directly correlates with firm profitability and market valuation. Well-being isn't a soft metric, it is a leading indicator of sustainable performance. So the framework operationalizes it.
By turning it into another metric?
By tying it to leadership accountability. The material discusses a professional services firm that develops others through empathetic coaching a full 20% of a manager's formal evaluation. They gave managers specific well-being dashboards that track things like working hours, weekend logins, and time off utilization.
Wait, so the manager's monitoring how much time the employee takes off?
Yes, but for protection. If an employee is accumulating excessive overtime and hasn't taken a vacation in a year, the system flags it in red. The manager is then strictly accountable for initiating a supportive conversation to redistribute that employee's workload.
I see.
If the manager ignores the burnout alert, their own evaluation suffers. By making empathy a measured, compensated competency, you guarantee it happens, rather than just hoping you hired a naturally nice manager.
But mandating empathy creates a profound philosophical and operational contradiction. You are taking the most fundamentally human, relational qualities, compassion, understanding, psychological support, and instrumentalizing them into just another metric on a dashboard.
It ensures consistency.
Think about the friction of that interaction. An algorithm flags a human being for the behavioral anomaly of failing to take vacation. The manager then receives this alert and deploys a scheduled empathy intervention.
It's an intervention to stop burnout.
But the employee knows, and the manager knows that this intervention is happening because the manager needs to secure their own 30% manager quality index score for their upcoming promotion cycle. The empathy is entirely transactional.
I have to push back there. Does the manager's motivation really matter if the outcome is that the employee's workload is successfully redistributed and a severe case of burnout is prevented? If the system structurally forces good behavior, isn't that a net positive for everyone involved?
Motivation absolutely matters because human beings are highly attuned to authenticity. When empathy is perceived as transactional or coercive, it completely fails to generate psychological safety. Fraser's meta-analysis proves this. True psychological safety requires genuine interpersonal risk-taking.
So
If a manager approaches me to discuss my burnout, but I know they are doing it simply to satisfy a dashboard metric, I am not going to be vulnerable with them. I am going to tell them exactly what they need to hear so they can check the box, secure their index score, and we can both get back to work.
So you're arguing that structured empathy is actually counterproductive.
I am arguing that you cannot engineer human empathy through surveillance. You cannot say to a workforce, we are going to monitor your every digital move, your keystrokes, and your working hours. But don't worry, we've trained the people monitoring you to use empathetic listening techniques. This surveillance negates the empathy. It transforms the manager from a supportive coach into an algorithmic enforcement mechanism wrapped in a velvet glove of corporate wellness speak.
Well, that perspective, while fiercely protective of human authenticity, ignores the reality of managing at organizational scale. We cannot rely on organic, unmeasured empathy.
Why not?
Because history proves that unmeasured empathy heavily favors those who share similarities with leadership and often fails marginalized groups entirely. By measuring empathy and tracking well-being metrics, we enforce a baseline standard of care across an organization of 10,000 people.
But look at how that standard of care is enforced.
It's enforced by decoupling evaluation from physical presence. The IPEM framework suggests we stop focusing on presenteeism. It focuses purely on outcomes rather than activity monitoring, trusting employees to manage their work patterns. In that context, the continuous data simply acts as a safety net.
A safety net?
Yeah. It isn't about micromanagement. It's about identifying the moments where the employee's capacity to perform sustainably is threatened and catching them before they fall.
I understand the desire for a safety net. But a safety net you are forced to wear as a straitjacket is no longer a safety net. The decoupling of evaluation from presenteeism you just mentioned, where companies say, work whenever and however you want, we only measure results, is very often a trap in these highly quantified systems.
How is flexibility a trap?
Because they stop tracking whether your physical body is in an office chair at 9 a.m., but they replace it with digital presenteeism. Are you responding to Slack messages within the algorithmic benchmark time? Are your project commits happening at a steady, predictable velocity?
But that's just tracking work progress.
The pressure doesn't disappear. It just becomes ambient, invisible, and constant. And the framework solution to this ambient stress is often to provide, resilience workshops and mindfulness programs.
Which are designed to help the employee.
But it is the ultimate paradox. We are using continuous algorithmic evaluation to create an environment so cognitively exhausting that we have to mandate corporate mindfulness just so employees can survive the very system we built to measure them.
Well, let's pull back and look at the synthesis of these ideas. Because while the risks of ambient stress and algorithmic surveillance absolutely must be managed, returning to the past is simply not an option.
No, it's not.
A rigorously governed IPEM framework, one that combines multidimensional metrics to eliminate the massive rater bias of the past, uses AI auditing to uncover systemic inequities, and structures empathy accountability to ensure leaders actually support their teams, it provides a far more equitable path forward.
It's definitely an attempt at a more equitable path.
Right. It replaces the subjective, deeply flawed legacy systems with a model that actively strives to be developmental. The data provides the objective ground truth, and the human leader provides the necessary context and care.
The inherent tension between continuous algorithmic evaluation and psychological safety is, in my view, unresolved by this framework. While the goals of IPEM are certainly laudable, human empathy and employee well-being cannot simply be engineered as additional metrics on a continuous surveillance dashboard.
I hear you.
When you try to operationalize empathy through algorithmic alerts and manager quality indices, you risk corrupting the fundamental nature of the human connection that is actually required for genuine development.
I think where we fundamentally align is on the absolute obsolescence of the past. Both of us acknowledge a shared agreement that legacy annual reviews based on a single manager's flawed memory and subjective bias are entirely obsolete for modern knowledge-intensive work.
Completely obsolete.
And we also completely agree that psychological safety is the bedrock of organizational success. Our disagreement lies purely in whether continuous data enhances that safety or extinguishes it.
Agreed. The transition to digital age evaluation is fraught with profound psychological and operational tensions. It is a massive socio-technical challenge, and organizations must tread incredibly carefully before wiring their culture to an algorithm.
There is certainly so much more to explore within Illich's framework and Dr. Westover's analysis. The shift from retrospectively evaluating the past to continually measuring the present requires a total recalibration of the psychological contract between employer and employee.
It really does.
So as we leave you today, think back to that car with the covered dashboard. Are we finally building a system that uncovers the windshield, providing clear, real-time guidance and a helpful navigator in the passenger seat?
Or, by wiring every inch of the car with continuous sensors and cameras, have we simply made the driver too terrified to turn the steering wheel? We will leave that for you to decide.